Michael Corleone is not merely a mafia leader in the Godfather universe. He is one of cinema's most refined representations of moral transformation, power, and the erosion of identity. What makes him compelling is not the violence he commits, but how and why he changes. At the beginning of the story, Michael deliberately distances himself from the criminal world his family has built. He is educated, disciplined, and, in his own words, not part of the family business. He places himself morally above the Corleone name. This, however, is the fundamental illusion at the core of Michael's character. Because Michael's identity is not truly independent, it is defined solely through opposition. Michael Corleone's personality initially displays strong ego control. He's someone who can regulate his emotions, suppress immediate reactions, and think long-term. However, this control is not an inner equilibrium. It is a strategy of emotional distance. Psychologically, Michael believes that by staying away from his family, he is protecting himself. Yet identity cannot be built solely on rejection. The more a person defines themselves by what they oppose, the more deeply they remain connected to it. Michael's statement, "I'm not like them," in fact, reveals how central their world is within his own mind. The assassination attempt on Vito Corleone is not merely a family matter for Michael. It shatters the moral order through which he understands the world. At this point, Michael exhibits a classic trauma response. He is confronted with a reality he cannot control. Being good is not enough to protect the ones he loves. Law, distance, and logic become ineffective. After the trauma, a single need emerges in Michael's mind: to eliminate uncertainty. This is exactly where the pursuit of power begins. But it is not ambition. It is an escape from chaos. Michael's first killing is not perceived by him as a change of character, but as a moral exception. He still defines himself as someone different. This is merely a temporary act. Once order is restored, it will end. This way of thinking is the foundation of moral relativism. Right and wrong are no longer universal. They derive their meaning from outcomes. At this stage, Michael does not see himself as a bad person. On the contrary, he sees himself as someone who takes responsibility. Yet throughout history, the greatest catastrophes have emerged from precisely this mental framework. At a certain point, a critical threshold is crossed in Michael's mind. The idea of returning to a normal life quietly disappears. There are no longer two separate Michaels. In psychology, this is called identity integration. The roles merge. Michael no longer sees himself merely as someone who commits actions. He accepts being the kind of person who is capable of committing them. At this stage, Michael's character approaches Machiavelli's conception of power. Authority exists independently of morality. What matters is not intention, but sustainability. For Michael, the right question is no longer, "Is this just?" but rather, "Does this preserve order?" As Michael gains power, he becomes emotionally colder. This is not a personality disorder, but a psychological defense mechanism. Empathy turns into a risk. Closeness threatens control. From a psychoanalytic perspective, Michael employs emotional isolation. Not feeling makes decision-making easier. Love weakens power. At this point, Michael's relationship with his father becomes decisive. Michael cannot truly oppose his father. He begins by rejecting him, but ultimately comes to identify with him. In Freud's terms, conflict with the father figure gives way to replacing him. While trying to escape becoming his father, Michael transforms into an even colder version of him. As responsibility increases, a person must suppress their humanity. Love becomes a risk. Trust turns into a form of weakness. Even family ceases to be a bond to be protected and becomes a system to be managed. When Michael becomes the Godfather, he no longer acts out of loyalty or justice. What drives him is continuity, maintaining order, maintaining control, sustaining the authority he has constructed. This is what separates Michael from classical villains. He does not love power. He endures it, and the cost of this endurance is severe. He sacrifices intimacy, honesty, and ultimately moral consistency. He ends up alone because he cannot allow anyone close enough to threaten the structure he has built. At this point, the single philosophical warning that sits at the very center of our discussion is this: he who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. Friedrich Nietzsche. Michael Corleone ultimately gains everything: power, respect, absolute control. But this victory comes at a cost: loneliness. emotional detachment, the loss of moral consistency. Michael Corleone shows us this. Power does not corrupt a person. Power reveals what was already there. This is not a mafia story. It is the tragedy of a man who mistakes control for survival.